Would you still call it a coincidence if it happened the same way twice? You're here with us for real 4chan stories, told by people who had to live through the details we're about to unpack. In this one, the unease builds around something simple, which makes it even harder to brush off. Get comfortable, dim the lights, and subscribe if you haven't already. Let's begin. The first time it happened, I was standing outside the science building at Northeastern, with my headphones in, trying to figure out if I could make it through a 2-hour lab without eating. It was late October 2022, my first semester away from home. I'd moved from a small town in Ohio to Boston in August, and I still hadn't figured out the rhythm of it. Meal plan money kept vanishing on stupid things like sushi from the market on Huntington. By the third week of October, I was down to counting swipes and skipping breakfast most days to stretch it. That morning, I hadn't eaten anything since a granola bar the night before. I remember standing there, watching leaves come down across the little courtyard between buildings, that specific Boston fall light, sharp and low, doing math in my head about whether I could hold out until dinner. Then this guy walked up to me. I recognized him from my Intro to Psych lecture. Big hall, maybe 200 kids. He sat a few rows behind me on the left, tall, kind of quiet, wore the same brown Carhartt jacket most days. I think we'd said hi maybe twice in the whole semester. That was the extent of it. He stopped in front of me, pulled his earbud out and said, "You haven't eaten today, right?" I froze for a second. I thought I misheard him. No, not really. He nodded like that confirmed something. Then he reached into his backpack, pulled out a sandwich in a Ziploc bag and held it out. Here, that was it. He didn't smile, didn't wait for me to say anything, just handed it over and walked off toward the tea stop. I stood there holding a turkey sandwich on wheat bread, watching the back of his brown jacket disappear into the crowd on Forsyth. I ate the sandwich in the stairwell before lab. It was a really good sandwich. Whoever made it had put actual lettuce and tomato and a decent slice of provolone on it. I remember thinking someone in his family probably packed it for him, and now I was eating it. The rest of the day I kept trying to figure out what had just happened. I told myself he probably had an extra. Maybe he was being nice. Maybe he'd noticed me in class looking tired. I texted my roommate about it that night. He said, "Bro, that's cult recruiter weird." He wasn't entirely wrong. I didn't see the guy again for 6 days. Then the next Tuesday, same class, I walked out of the lecture hall, and he was standing just past the doorway with his backpack on one shoulder. He fell in step next to me without saying anything, and I got this dumb little jolt in my chest, like when a teacher singles you out and you don't know what for. I hadn't eaten that day either. My roommate had used the last of the peanut butter, and I hadn't been to the market since Sunday. My stomach had been doing that low, hollow, sour thing all through class, where you can't really focus, and everything sounds a little far away. We walked maybe 20 feet down the hall together. Then he stopped, opened the front pocket of his backpack, and handed me a granola bar and a banana. "Eat something," he said. I laughed, kind of nervously. "Dude, thanks, but you don't have to." He shrugged. "It's fine." Then he walked off. That's when it started to bother me. Because he hadn't asked this time. He hadn't confirmed. He'd just known. The same way you know it's cold out when you see someone put a coat on. I sat on a bench in the atrium and ate the banana slowly, and tried to figure out what he could possibly be seeing. Was I skinnier? Was I pale? Did my hands shake in class? I hadn't told anyone I was running low on food money. I hadn't posted about it. My parents didn't even know. I'd been really deliberate about not making it a thing. That week, I started paying attention to him in class. Not staring, just noticing. He took notes on paper, in pencil, and he had this habit of tapping the eraser against his chin when the professor asked a question. He never raised his hand. He didn't seem to have a big group of friends in the room. He'd come in, sit down, take notes, leave. Nothing about him was weird. That was the part that made it weird. The third time was on a Thursday in early November. It was raining, that thin, cold Boston rain that gets under your collar, and I was crossing the footbridge over Huntington trying to make it back to my dorm before my next class. I hadn't had breakfast. I'd had a coffee. That was it. He came up the stairs from the other side of the bridge, and we almost bumped into each other. He looked at me for maybe half a second. Then he unzipped his bag, pulled out a plastic container with 2 slices of banana bread wrapped in a paper towel, and put it in my hand. "Take it," he said. And then, "You're gonna get sick if you keep doing this." Something about that sentence made the back of my neck go cold, because I hadn't said anything to him, not once. He'd never asked how often I was skipping meals. He'd never asked if I had money. He'd never asked anything. And now he was talking to me like he'd been watching this pattern for weeks. I stood on the bridge in the rain holding banana bread, and I got, honestly, a little scared. Not the horror movie kind, the quieter kind. The kind where your brain starts running through options and none of them feel good. Was he following me? Was he in my dorm somehow? Did he know my schedule? Was he one of those people you read about on the news, where it turns out they've been going through your trash for months? I went back to my room and locked the door, and I did not eat the banana bread. I set it on my desk and looked at it for a while like it might do something. I told my roommate. He was more freaked out than I was. He wanted me to report it to somebody, though neither of us really knew who you report something like that to. "Hi, this guy keeps giving me food." Right. I did something worse. I looked him up. I only knew his first name from a group project sign-up sheet the professor had passed around in September. Marcus. I typed his first name and the course number into Instagram, and I found him on the second try. His account was almost empty. A few pictures of the Charles at sunset, one picture of a dog, one picture of a little kid in a Bruins jersey holding up a juice box and grinning. The caption on that one was, "Little man's blood sugar finally holding steady. Proud of you, buddy." I stared at that post for probably 5 minutes. I didn't put it together right away. I think I wanted to keep being suspicious of him for a little longer, because being suspicious was easier than admitting I'd been walking around campus for 2 months looking like something was wrong with me and not knowing it. The next Tuesday after class, I caught up to him in the hallway. My heart was doing that thing where it's beating in your throat. I said, "Hey, can I ask you something?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "How do you keep knowing? Like, how do you know when I haven't eaten?" He stopped walking. He looked at me for a second like he was deciding whether the question was serious. Then he shrugged. "Your face changes when you haven't eaten," he said. "You go kind of gray around the eyes, and you get this thing where you keep swallowing. I don't know. I just notice it." I didn't say anything. "My little brother's diabetic," he said. "Type 1. He got diagnosed when he was 6. I've been watching his blood sugar since I was 10 years old. You learn to read it in people's faces. You can't really turn it off after a while." He said it kind of embarrassed, like he was apologizing for it. "I wasn't trying to be weird about it," he said. "I just had food, so..." I stood there for a second. All of it clicked at once. The sandwich, and the granola bar, and the banana bread, and the walk across the bridge in the rain. And I felt like garbage for the Instagram thing. I said thanks. I mean, I said it properly. Not the mumbled thanks from the first sandwich. I said, "Thank you. Seriously, that helped a lot. I've been having kind of a rough couple months." He nodded. He said, "Yeah, I could tell." We got coffee that afternoon. He paid, which I tried to argue about and lost. I told him about the meal plan thing. He told me about his brother, who's 11 now, and about how his mom works overnights at a hospital in Quincy, and about how he almost didn't come to college because he didn't want to leave the kid alone with the numbers. We've been best friends since that day, 3 years now. I was at his brother's middle school graduation in June. Kid gave me a fist bump and called me by name. Sometimes I think about how close I came to being the guy who reported the only person on campus who noticed him. And that's the whole story. I just wanted to put it somewhere. I've worked field geology for about 11 years, and there's exactly one site I still take the long way around. It's an old copper claim about 90 minutes east of Phoenix, in a stretch of hills that nobody bothers with anymore. In June 2021, I spent 4 days there. On the 4th day, I found something I didn't put in my report, and I've been thinking about it ever since. The job itself was boring. A private outfit had bought the mineral rights on a lot of exhausted claims across the Southwest, betting that new extraction tech would make the leftover ore worth pulling. My job was to walk the accessible tunnels, take samples, log them, and write up a recommendation, yes or no. Cheap work, done alone, no crew, because most of these sites don't justify a crew. The mine had been closed since the 70s. 2 adits on the south face, both open, both stable enough. The company had sent me the original survey maps from 1968 and a couple of updates from '74. I had a helmet with a good lamp, a backup light, a respirator, a Brunton, a laser rangefinder, my sample bag, and the maps in a waterproof sleeve. That's it. No radio, because there's no signal in there anyway. I checked in with the motel clerk each morning and evening. That was the safety plan. The first 3 days went the way those days usually go. I'd walk a section, tap the walls, look for anything interesting in the vein remnants, chip a few samples, log the GPS coordinates at the mouth, and mark my position on the map with a pencil. The tunnels smelled like wet iron and old dust. Every so often I'd hear rock shift somewhere deep in the mountain, which is normal in an old mine. Rock never really stops moving. On the morning of the 4th day, I went in through the lower adit to finish a section I'd started the day before. About 400 feet in, past a supported junction, the main drift ran north-northwest along what was left of the vein. I was walking that stretch slowly, my lamp on the wall, when I noticed the air pressure change. Not dramatic, just a soft pull against the side of my face, the way you feel a door open in another room. I stopped and turned the lamp on the wall on my left. There was an opening there, maybe 5 feet high, 3 wide. The rubble at the base of it had been swept aside at some point, and the edges of the opening were clean, not blasted, cut. You can tell the difference if you've been in enough old mines. A blast leaves a rough, radiating fracture pattern. This was worked stone, chisel marks running vertically, evenly spaced. I checked the map. There was nothing on it. Not the '68 survey, not the '74 update. I checked my position twice with the rangefinder against the last supported junction. The opening was real, and it wasn't on any drawing anyone had. Now, I want to be clear about something. Unmapped side passages happen. Old miners cut exploratory drifts all the time and didn't always bother to update the paperwork, especially if the drift didn't pay. Finding one isn't a big deal. What was unusual was how clean the cut was, and how little debris there was on the floor. I took a picture of the opening from the drift, then stepped inside. The passage ran level and straight for maybe 40 feet. The walls stayed worked, chisel marks the whole way. No timbering, no bracing, no drill holes for dynamite. Somebody had done this by hand, which meant it was slow work, and somebody had a reason to do it slow and quiet. That was the first thing that started to bother me, and I noted it in my field book and kept walking. The passage ended in a chamber. It was small. I paced it later, roughly 8 feet by 10. The ceiling was low enough that my lamp lit the whole thing when I turned my head. The far wall was solid rock, no continuation. This was a room, not a tunnel to somewhere else. Somebody had cut a room out of the mountain. I stood in the entrance and I looked at the floor before I stepped in, because that's habit. You don't walk into an unmapped space in an old mine without checking your footing. There was a mark on the floor, a ring. A shallow, circular groove worn into the stone, maybe 4 feet across, dead in the center of the room. Not scratched in with a tool, worn. The kind of wear you see on a threshold that's been stepped over for 100 years, or on a stone step under a rope pulley. Something had stood inside that circle, or moved along its edge, for a long time. Long enough to polish the rock into a track. In the center of the circle there was a bolt. I want to describe this carefully because I've been over it a lot. It was a vertical iron bolt, maybe 1.25 inches thick, driven into the stone floor and set with lead, the way you'd anchor a machine base in the old days. The head was flat, hammered down, and had a heavy forged ring welded to it. The whole thing was black with age. It wasn't rusted through. Somebody had made it to last. A chain ran from the ring. The chain was heavy, not decorative. The links were about the size of my thumb, hand-forged, uneven the way old ironwork is uneven. It lay coiled loosely on the floor, inside the ring of wear, and it ended maybe 6 feet from the bolt. The last link was broken, not cut, not sawed. The metal at the break was deformed, pulled thin on one side and blunt on the other, the way a link fails when something twists and pulls on it past its limit. I'm not a metallurgist, but I've handled enough hardware in the field to know what a snapped chain looks like versus a cut one. This one had come apart under load. I stood in the doorway of that chamber for a while. I didn't step inside the ring. I did what I was there to do. I photographed the opening, the passage, the chamber, the mark on the floor, the bolt, the chain, and the broken link, from a few angles each. I measured the room with the rangefinder and wrote the dimensions in my book. I took a small sample of the wall stone because I had to have a reason on paper for having been in there. I didn't touch the bolt. I didn't touch the chain. Before I left, I stood at the entrance and turned my lamp off for a second to check for any draft, any daylight, any sign that this room connected to somewhere else. Nothing, just the closed feeling of a sealed pocket in the rock. When I turned the lamp back on, I noticed something I'd missed before. The floor inside the ring, in the center where the bolt was darker than the rest of the chamber. Not stained, just darker. Like the stone there had been worn smooth and low over a long time by whatever occupied that space. A shallow dish worn into the floor. I walked back down the passage a lot faster than I'd walked in. Out at the truck, I sat for maybe 20 minutes with the door open before I could write anything. It was a bright afternoon, the sun on the hood, a red-tailed hawk turning slow circles over the ridge. Very normal Arizona June, 98 degrees. I drank most of a warm bottle of water and tried to think. Here's the thing, I could think of ordinary explanations. 19th century mine security for a payroll safe. Storage for something the mining company didn't want inventoried. An old assay setup with a rotating piece of equipment. There are boring, legitimate reasons to bolt something to a floor. I know that. I told myself the boring version on the drive back to the motel, and I mostly believed it. The part I couldn't get around was the wear on the floor. Equipment doesn't pace. A safe doesn't polish a track around itself. Whatever had lived inside that ring had moved over and over along the length of the chain for a very long time. And whatever moved had eventually pulled hard enough one time to open the last link. I wrote my report that night in the motel. I said the side drift was non-productive, no economically viable ore, and recommended against further work in that section. I used the phrase, no features of interest. I filed it 2 days later from a coffee shop in Globe and drove home. I kept the photos on a card in a drawer for about a month. I looked at them twice. The second time I looked at the picture of the broken link, and I put the card in the microwave for 15 seconds, and then in the trash on the way to work. I've thought about that chamber more than I want to admit. Not in a dramatic way. In the way you think about a bill you didn't pay. What I keep coming back to is the break in the last link. If something inside the ring pulled until the iron gave, then whatever had been kept there was strong enough, eventually, to leave. If somebody outside the ring cut it loose, they did it by pulling, not cutting, which is a strange choice when you've got tools. And either way, the room was empty when I found it, and the passage was open, and nobody had walled it back up. I don't know how long the chain held. I don't know what it held. I don't know who broke it, or from which side. I filed a clean report. The company sold the claim a year later. I never asked who bought it. The intake came in on a Tuesday afternoon in January, and I remember it because we'd just gotten the new name tags, and mine still had the plastic wrap on the corner. I was working the closed ward at a private psychiatric facility off Greenville Avenue in Dallas, North Side, 2nd floor. 12 rooms, 1 nurse's station, keypad on both doors. Not a huge place. You get to know your patients pretty fast. His paperwork was clean. That's the part I keep coming back to. Referral from a psychiatrist in Plano, insurance card, driver's license, prior medication list, everything. Name was Michael, 41, brought in by his sister for what she described as a prolonged dissociative episode. He walked in on his own 2 feet, signed the voluntary admission form, handed over his belt and shoelaces without being asked. The sister cried a little in the hallway and left before dinner service. He was tall, thin, with short dark hair going a little gray at the temples. Very still. That's the word I'd use. Some patients pace, some sleep, some talk to themselves under the fluorescence. Michael would sit in the plastic chair by his window, both feet flat on the floor, hands on his knees, and just watch the parking lot for hours. If you spoke to him, he'd turn his head slowly and look at you like he was trying to place your face from a photograph. Then he'd go back to the window. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't a flight risk. He took his meds when we handed them over, drank his water, ate about half of every meal. In group, he sat in the circle and never opened his mouth. Dr. Patel adjusted his sertraline once in the first week and noted, minimal engagement, continue observation. That was the whole clinical picture. Only strange thing early on, and honestly, I let it go, was that he didn't respond to his name. Not the way you'd expect. If I said, Michael, meds, he'd stand up. But if I said it from behind him or across the day room, nothing. Like it wasn't stitched to him yet. I chalked it up to the meds or whatever fog had put him in here in the first place. People come in blunted. It happens. Second week, I noticed he ate with his left hand. His chart said right-handed. I actually flagged that on a sticky note and stuck it inside his file, meant to bring it up with Patel. Then a fight broke out in room 7, a kid trying to break his own wrist on the doorframe, and I forgot about the sticky note for 3 days. When I remembered and pulled the chart, the note was gone. Housekeeping, probably. Or it fell out. I didn't think much of it then. Small things kept adding up. He didn't know how to work the shower handle in his room, and every unit we've had installed for the last 6 years uses the same handle. I had to show him. He didn't ask for his phone, not once. Not in 20 days. Nobody does that. Everyone asks for their phone, even the ones who barely speak. He didn't ask about his sister. He didn't ask when he could go home. When Patel told him during their Tuesday session that his estimated release was still 2 to 3 weeks out, he just nodded once and said, "All right." That was the longest word I heard him say up to that point. The other thing, and this is the one that got under my skin a little even before the call, was that he watched the staff. Not in a threatening way, he watched us like he was studying. When Marta came on for the night shift, he'd track her from the door to the station and back. When the janitor came through with the buffer, he watched the buffer. When Patel unlocked the med cart, Michael's eyes went to the keypad. I told Marta about it once at shift change, and she said, "Girl, they all do that. They're bored," which was true, mostly. The call came in on a Wednesday, 22 days in. I was covering the desk while Marta ran to the vending machine. Line 1 lit up, and I picked up expecting a family member or a pharmacy callback. Instead, it was a man's voice, calm, a little confused, asking if we could help him figure something out. He said his insurance had flagged a claim from our facility for inpatient psychiatric services, and he wanted to understand what it was for because he had never been a patient anywhere in his life. I asked for his name and date of birth. He gave them. I typed them in. They matched Michael's file exactly. I told him I'd need to call him back. I put the phone down, and I sat there for a second with my hand still on the receiver, and I could hear the buffer humming down the hallway, and Marta's key on the outer door, and the little tone the med cart makes when you don't close it all the way. All of it sounded very far off. I got Marta at the station and told her to watch line 2. Then I walked down the hall to room 5 and looked through the observation window. Michael was sitting in his plastic chair by the window, both feet flat, hands on his knees. He turned his head, slow, and looked right at me. Not at the door, at me. Like he'd known I was going to be there in that exact second. I stepped back from the window and went straight to Patel's office. Patel called the guy back on speaker with me in the room. He put us through a set of verification questions I didn't even know we had. Middle name of the referring physician, name of the pharmacy on file, the address of the sister who had signed him in. The real man got 2 of the 3 wrong on purpose to see if we'd flinch, then corrected himself. His voice never went up. He said, "Someone is using my name in your building, and I need you to understand that I have never met any of these people." He was a project manager for a logistics company. He had a wife. He was calling from his own kitchen in Frisco. He offered to drive down. Patel told him to stay put and called Dallas PD from his end while we called from ours. We didn't go in the room. That was Patel's call, and I agreed with it. Instead, we moved him. We told him through the intercom that we needed to do a routine transfer for a plumbing issue, and he stood up without asking a single question and walked to the seclusion room at the end of the hall on his own. He sat down on the mattress in there and put his hands on his knees again and looked at the wall. The door locked from the outside. He didn't try the handle. The officers who came were 2 uniforms and then, maybe an hour later, a detective. They ran his prints on a portable scanner right there in the hallway. Nothing came up. Not a hit, not a partial, not a rejection. The detective made a face at the screen and ran them again. Same result. He asked us if the scanner was working, and one of the uniforms had already tested it on himself, and it was fine. They asked him for a name. He didn't answer. They asked him where he was from. He didn't answer. They asked him if he understood English. He looked at the detective for a long time, and then he looked back at the wall. They took him out through the service elevator around 10 that night. I was still there because Patel wanted me to write everything down while it was fresh. I watched them walk him past the station. He didn't look at me. He looked at the keypad on the outer door as we went through it, the same way he'd been looking at it for 3 weeks. 2 days later, one of the officers came back to pick up a copy of the intake paperwork. I asked, because I couldn't help it, if they'd figured out who he was. He said no, but that the man had started talking that morning. I asked what he said. The officer paused, and then he said, "We don't know. Nobody there knows. They're sending it out to a couple of universities." He said it wasn't Spanish. It wasn't anything Middle Eastern. It wasn't anything Slavic. One of the translators they'd called in had done fieldwork in Papua New Guinea and said it wasn't from there either. It had structure, apparently, grammar. It just wasn't anything anyone recognized. By the end of the week, he'd stopped talking again. Management moved me to the 3rd floor the following Monday, geriatric psych. They didn't frame it as a transfer connected to any of it, just coverage needs. I didn't push. My badge worked the same on the new elevator, and I stopped taking calls at the 2nd floor station. Marta stayed downstairs. I ran into her in the parking garage in February. She smoked and I didn't, but I stood with her for a minute anyway. I asked her, and she said the room had been cleaned out the same night I got moved. She said a few days after that, 2 guys came in wearing regular clothes, no uniforms, no visible ID, and they went into Patel's office for about 40 minutes, and then they left. She said Patel didn't come out until an hour after that, and he didn't say anything to anyone. She said, "They took him. That's all I know. Nobody signed anything I saw." I asked her what she thought. She lit another cigarette off the first one, and she said, "I think we're not supposed to think about it." Then she went back inside. I still work in Dallas, not at that facility. I don't drive down Greenville if I can avoid it. Every so often, my insurance sends me one of those annual summary letters, the kind that lists every provider you've seen. And every time I open one, I check the name at the top twice before I read anything else. That's all for today's stories, guys. Let me know in the comments which one felt the most unsettling, and leave a like if you enjoyed the episode. 4chan always has another strange corner to look into, and sometimes the posts there feel a little too close to something ordinary. That's the part that stays with you after the screen goes dark. I'll see you in the next video.